What's up, everybody? It's Alex from Heavy New York, and on the phone we got Grant from In the Company of Serpents. Thank you so much for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yep, it's so awesome to have you here. The newest record, which is titled Lux, scheduled to come out tomorrow in exactly 24 hours from now, and by the time people hear this, it'll actually be out. But I just want to talk about like how the making of this record was and the recording and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, sure. This is one, I tend to start the writing process as soon as we get anything else out the door. So basically, I began writing the material for this as soon as we completed our last record. But in terms of like a lot of the thematic elements and, sort of the overarching, themes that we wound up making fairly central to the album, kind of came along as we went. Basically, my wife and I decided to have a kid, and so that's like, that's obviously a major life-changing sort of event. And I began with the writing of this record with a couple of different ideas kind of in mind. So the title of the album, Lux, is just kind of a nod to how certain esoteric philosophers over time have kind of searched for or tried to describe something like a fundamental root essence behind the manifest universe, or something akin to, I don't know, like what at its most basic, like God or creation itself might be. And oftentimes the analogy that they would employ would be that all is light, right? And so that's where the title of the record comes from. But at the same time, the etymology of my daughter's name also has the Latin lux basically behind it. And so on one hand, the way that I've been kind of talking about it is that there's the esoteric perspective of the meaning behind this record, and in that way it's kind of a form of esoteric prayer, but then more personally, it's also a message of love to my infant daughter. But that's kind of like the broad thematic background for it. Mm-hmm. But
yeah. Did this concept and this story determine the outcome of the music itself as well, or was it just sort of like a lyrical standpoint in which this concept was addressed?
Oh, it definitely did, yeah. I tend to kind of write in tandem. Like, typically, like, the music does often come before the lyrics. However, sometimes I'll, like, wake up with a particular phrase in my head or something from a dream and start writing around the lyrics, as opposed to the music first. And that definitely happened a few places with this record. And once you start to grasp the thematic elements that are going to define, any art project, they can't help but, inform the other facets of it. So yeah, it definitely had an impact.
Mm-hmm. Do you want the record to be kind of open to interpretation, or do you want listeners to kind of see things from maybe your point of view in a way?
It's I think with all art, it's kind of like what people's interpretation of something is kind of out of your hands once you release it to the world anyway. And that's kind of the fun of releasing art anyway, to some degree, is that, it's going to mean something else for everybody. But I also, I was pretty, with this one, I kind of went out of my way to like, write down and kind of put out there like what the thematic elements and different esoteric symbolism that was at play in the various songs, and just all of the various themes that I'm kind of playing with. I made them fairly explicit and have kind of gone out of my way to spell those out, because sometimes like on a certain level I want people to kind of know where I'm coming from, and where they take it from there is beyond me when once it gets released. But in the past, on occasion, when I've tried to be more enigmatic about stuff, nobody gleans all the stuff that's, to me, like deeply symbolically important and part of what makes it special in the first place. So I guess I'm trying to be a bit more explicit with it on this one.
Mm-hmm. If a listener wanted to be fully engaged into the story, you obviously, I think I it could be said about for any record, but like, do you want the listener to start off with the Fool's Journey and end with Prima Materia, or could a listener like maybe approach this album from any different angle?
It would be my preference that they listen to it front to back, but I understand that it's certainly a strange world we find ourselves in, particularly given the broader cultural moment of living through a pandemic. And if people are going to access the record and find inroads to it however they will, and if somebody's like, I wouldn't be surprised, for example, we have the second track on the record, Scales of Mott, has guest performances by Ethan McCarthy from Primitive Man and Ben Hutcherson from Chemist and Glacial Tomb on it. So, for fans of those bands that maybe don't know us, like, they're probably going to find their way into the record through that track, right? Mm-hmm. And that's fine with me. Yeah. But yeah, like, ultimately, I did kind of try to make this one cohesive whole, and I'd prefer for it to be taken as such.
Yeah, collaborating with Ben from Chemist and Ethan from Primitive Man, I mean, it doesn't get more Colorado of a collaboration than that, right?
Yeah, they're rad dudes, and I've been friends with both of them for quite some time. And I actually wrote the dirgy part that they both sing on. They actually sing on the exact same part. Like, I wanted to incorporate some of my buddies on the record, and like how I was thinking about it from a musical perspective was, like, I remember when I was first starting to get into death metal, I remember hearing Deicide for the first time, and like he juxtaposed the low guttural vocal with like a screeched one at the same time, like on most of the recordings. I've always thought that technique was kind of cool, and we've never really done anything like that. And plus, like, I can't do the crazy guttural shit that like Ethan can anyway. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of try something out like that, and see if my friends would be willing to help us execute it, and graciously they were.
That's awesome. Now, I mean, one thing I was kind of curious about, it was why didn't you collaborate with Spectral Voice on here, kind of make the whole Colorado Doom thing come full circle?
Yeah, that's another massively rad band. I think all those dudes, since they're also like 3/4 of those members are also in Blood Incantation, they're touring constantly. I know those dudes for sure, and adore their bands. I get the sneaking suspicion that they're quite busy at the moment, and anyhow, I have a longer relationship and friendship with Ethan and Ben, so it seemed natural to go to them. But hot damn, I would definitely like to collaborate with those bands as well if that was ever an option.
Now, being that this is obviously a very personal record for you, and during a very defining moment, and congratulations, by the way, on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, but like, being that this is a record that's so attachment to you and so personal, do you almost kind of feel a little bit more attached to this album than your previous work, or is it kind of like an equal thing altogether?
Yeah, I mean, like, this one's definitely holding a special place for me, but like, there's personal elements in everything we've done. Like the EP we did a few years ago, Merging in Light, was symbolically about this, like an alchemical marriage type of thing, like a union of opposites that, from an esoteric perspective, has all kinds of weight and meaning, but to me personally was about having just married my now spouse at that point. So like there's always personal elements that find their way into my work. But yeah, I'd say this one is probably the most fully realized, and it's certainly right now what I'm most proud of anything that we've done.
Which I think is amazing, because some people like use art or music or whatever as a method of escaping from themselves, but it almost seems like that, Lux, or just in the company of Serpents in general, is almost kind of like a direct extension of who you are. Like, I feel like people could get to know you personally based on just listening to your music. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's definitely, it's certainly a lens into part of my experience and part of my own spiritual and just personal journey, because I kind of can't help myself but to put that stuff into what we end up writing. So yeah, I think it is a bit of a lens into my thought process and my approach to life and just the broader journey I find myself on.
which is incredible. Do you almost, when it comes to like getting inspired to write and stuff like that, because obviously, you know, again, a very personal subject matter with Lux, but like, do you find it like, do you almost kind of need to put yourself in a certain element in order for like the creative ideas to flow, or does inspiration for like a riff or just a song in general, like the structure wise, just come out of nowhere?
Most, like, when it's like, I wish I was one of these artists that like had the discipline to just sit down and diligently create on like a daily basis, but the reality is that, you know, the muse strikes when it does, at least for me in my experience of the creative process. And, you know, I'll go through you know, ebbs and flows of hyper creativity, and then, you know, spells where I'm just like, I just want to kind of work on honing what I've already done. But yeah, like my favorite stuff that I've ever written typically is stuff that occurs to me spontaneously, or like in a dream. I've had several song ideas kind of occur to me in dreams, and when it kind of happens in that weird lightning flash sort of way, it seems, I don't know, to me, like that those can be really special compositions, because it feels like you're just like channeling something, that you know, you're a vessel for some sort of idea or approach that, you know, maybe is bigger than yourself. You know, like the joke I've cracked before is like, so that people don't have ideas have people, you know. And like when it just kind of hits you out of nowhere like that, and you just like wake up and you're like, I gotta find a pen right now and write this down, or I gotta grab a guitar right now and, you know, exercise from me this thing that just came into my head. Those can be the special compositions, and I tend to cherish those more than oftentimes ones that I've like kind of diligently worked on and tinkered with. Yeah.
Do you find it like maybe the longer you're working on something, the harder it is to kind of like maintain a moment in the songwriting in a way?
Yeah, to some degree. I think that's an astute observation, and certainly it can sound like or feel like you're just rehashing or retreading something over and over again once that initial inspiration is perhaps not there. And, you know, at a certain point, like, I can be, you know, a bit of a perfectionist, or at least self-deprecating about my own writing sometimes, and it's important to remind oneself here and there that like sometimes it's okay to just let a song be done, and, you know, even if it could have gone other directions, like sometimes it's okay to just say, all right, we're gonna put a bow on this. It's to use the cliche like don't let perfect get in the way of good enough type of thing, you know, especially if it's going to lead you to a place of creative stagnancy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so you kind of led me into the next question. I always ask every artist that, like, how do they know when a song is done? And it always stumbles them, especially because with you, you know, the Fool's Journey being 10 minutes, and then Light Child being 6.5 minutes, and then Nightfall being just a little bit over a minute. At, like, what point do you know when to, like, say that this song has said everything it had to say?
I think it's, you know, it's typically a case-by-case basis, and with certain ones, like, you know, they'll reach like a certain sort of point where it's just self-evident where it needs to end, you know, like the tune that Ben and Ethan are on, Scales of Mott, for example, builds to this pretty like thundering dirge crescendo at the end. And like when we were writing that, before I even, you know, presented it to those other dudes with the idea of them potentially doing a vocal guest on it, but like just writing that as a band in our jam space, it's like, yeah, that's definitely the end of that song. But the other one you brought up, Fool's Journey, it's like, you know, we played that song live several times before we ever got about to like, oh, we should write like a gnarly like thrashy chugga death metal part at the end, you know. So like some of these things kind of evolve over time, and yeah, like even so far as, you know, getting to the point where we're debuting them live, and then we're still correcting them after that because we've discovered it needed to go someplace else.
Yeah. When it comes to playing the material live, is there maybe a similar creative energy into playing live as when you're songwriting, or is it like a separate art altogether?
I'd say it's a little bit separate, but I get different things from both. Like I cherish both, and for me, like the live facet of things is far more about like performative catharsis. Like for me, like getting up on the stage and like just putting everything into a fairly heavy performance is something that's almost like music therapy for me. Like just it's deeply cathartic, and the writing process is almost like it comes from a different place. Even when you might be writing something heavy or something that might be cathartic by nature in its subject matter, for me the place of creativity and songwriting is often, you're feeling inspired even if you're writing about dark shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've always thought that, like, in the company of Serpents, music is actually fairly a little experimental because you have super, mesmerizing slow parts, but then you have super aggressive fast parts. Is it almost saying, like, depending on, like, the type of material that you're putting out, it's almost like expressing a different side of you personally?
Yeah, I think that, well, and I appreciate that characterization, and, like I've by and large tried to grow as a songwriter, and that often ends up looking like me incorporating all kinds of other different influences and sounds and emotions, and oral landscapes, if you will, that might not just be like middle of the road beaten path like doom tropes, and what, like, I mean, we've certainly written some of that too, but I try and break out of the tropes to some extent, and I like to experiment with things, and I like to see what we can kind of cull from the aether.
Yeah. And I mean, when you look at the entirety of your catalog from Lux to and Safar to Rendered onto Ash, like, could these almost like be a timeline or a self-portrait or representative of who you are at a particular time? We already talked about like Lux
Totally.
having a personal element, but like I think it's fair to say that like you're not trying to escape yourself. It's almost a self-portrait of who you are at that particular time.
Yeah, and I think that's perceptive, and like I'm inclined to mostly agree. A big part of the themes that we've kind of incorporated, and part of my personal, I guess, touch that I wind up putting into our music is that a lot of the esoteric themes and sort of occult ideas that wind up making their way into our work, for me at least, are fundamentally about radical self-transformation or self-actualization. And so, if I sound like the same person on a record I did 5 years ago, then I haven't really changed much. But I would like to think that might be evident in kind of what you're describing, or the more biographical facets of our work. But like, yeah, it's definitely, I would say that yeah, they're certainly snapshots of where I was at different points in my life.
Awesome. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Is there just anything else that you would like to promote for In the Company of Serpents? Obviously, thanks to a certain virus that shall not be named on my show. Yeah, I don't want to give it any promotion.
Yeah.
Is there just anything else within the Company of Serpents that you would like to promote for the Lux record cycle? Like, obviously, when this is over, can we be expecting to see you on the road? And can you come to New York City, please?
Yeah, so that's still kind of up in the air. So we were supposed to ostensibly be doing a East Coast tour later in the fall, but I don't really know what the landscape of live music is going to look like come that time, and whether or not people are going to be ready to get into a packed room with a bunch of other sweaty Hectors. But I'm holding out hope that that when the dust settles from all this, we'll be able to get back to live performance, because I mentioned the sort of cathartic facet of it for me, and it's something that's deeply important to me and that I quite miss. We had to, like, our record release show was going to be like this Saturday. Obviously, that's off the table with a lockdown state and stay-at-home orders everywhere. So. I would like to say, yeah, we will be touring for sure, but I just don't know for sure. But holding out hope that it'll still happen. But other than that, we still bought a bunch of merch or made a bunch of merch with the idea in mind that we'd be able to go on the road, sell it to people, and play in front of folks. So in absence of that, if somebody wants to buy, they know a massive pile of T-shirts sitting in my closet, then that would help too.
Yeah, absolutely. If people could purchase all your merch on Bandcamp and everything like that.
Yeah. Our Bandcamp's our primary storefront, and you can get the record there. We've still got a handful of copies of the deluxe vinyl version. I think it's like less than 30 copies remaining of that as of when we're speaking right now. But we always try and go pretty over the top with extras and fun, like weird packaging choices on the deluxe stuff. So if anybody is a collector or vinyl nerd in that capacity, we do have some of those left.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Grant. Everybody, we are here with Grant in the company of Serpents. Be sure to pick up Lux if you haven't already. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.